Hi guys, Zach here, and welcome to the second Game Maker Studio online multiplayer tutorial series. And today what we're going to do is look at creating our client side, and by the end of this tutorial we will have a complete server client system set up where we can have two boxes moving in two different games, and it will send the data to each other so we can see these other objects moving in our game. So what's good is last tutorial we created the server, and we're actually going to be using a lot of the same concepts for creating the server as we are with creating the client side of things. Alright, so let's just go ahead and begin. I'm going to go ahead and create a new script, and this is going to be called Client Connect. And let's just go ahead and create all of them now. So I'm going to create a Client Connect. We're going to want a Client Disconnect. And we are going to want a client handle message. Alright, so those are the three scripts we're going to use just for now. We're going to create one more later on, but we just need these for now. Alright, and I'm also going to go ahead and create a new object called oClient, and this is where all of our client stuff is going to be stored. So we had our server here, and this is where we stored everything like creating the server, all of our networking events, and we have our server client as well. So we're going to create our client, and it's going to just basically be the same thing. So in the create event, we're just going to set up the client. So I'm just going to say connect equals client connect. And here we're going to want two arguments. We're going to want the IP address that we want to connect to, and we're going to want the port. So here I'm going to say we're just going to use the local connection for now. So it's 127.0.0.1, and then the port is going to be 9000. That's what we used on the server, so make sure that is correct. Our port right here. So yeah, that's pretty much all we're going to need. So in our client connect, let's go ahead and just set up those arguments. So client underscore connect. We want our IP and our port. So here I'm just going to put that in. So IP equals argument 0, and our port equals argument 1. Alright, pretty simple. So on our client connect, the first thing we want to do is connect our socket to the server. So I'm going to just say socket equals network underscore create socket, and the type is going to be our network underscore socket underscore TCP, because we're using the TCP version here. Then we want to actually connect to it. So I'm going to say var connect equals network underscore connect underscore raw, and here we're going to want our socket, our IP, and our port. And then just like our server, what we have here is if our if it returns less than 0, then that means we don't have a connection. So just to sort of tell the user that, hey, we can't connect to it, we're going to say if connect is less than 0, then we're going to show error could not connect to server, and we'll abort it. So pretty simple code right now, and that should all work. So now we can actually connect to the server just like that. So just like in our actual server, we're going to need a client map as well. So I'm going to say ds underscore map create to hold all of the other clients in our game so we know which one is which. And we're going to need a send buffer as well. So I'm not going to really go over these concepts again because it's basically the same exact thing we did with our server. So if this is sort of confusing to you, then you should go over to my first tutorial, and I explained why we need a send buffer and why we need a client map, right? So if we go to our server, we have server handle message, and this is where we look at our client map and our send buffer, and this send buffer is going to be what we use to send all the data. Sort of recap a little bit there. All right, so let's go ahead and let's do the client disconnect real quick. Pretty simple stuff, so I'm just gonna put client disconnect. And here we're not going to want any arguments for it. We're just going to destroy the DS map. So I'm going to say client map. And we're going to destroy the network connection, which would be socket. Alright, so in our client, we're going to want to put in the destroy event, we're just going to put in our client disconnect. And then in our client, we're also going to need to go to our asynchronous networking event. And here we're going to put in the same thing. So if we go to our server code, it's basically the same thing. So if we just copy this and we put it down here, and we don't need connect or disconnect because that's all on the server side. We're just going to need our data because our client is going to be sending data. So here I'm just going to change it to client handle message. And we're not actually going to need our ID because we already have that, so we're just going to need our buffer. So in client connect and our client handle message, just say client underscore handle underscore message, buffer, and our var buffer equals argument 0. So now we can actually just take our server handle message and we can just copy this, just do that there, and put it down. It's just sort of like a good base to start off with on what we actually need. So we're going to be looping through while true. We're going to need our message ID, and we're going to do a switch statement with our message move. And let's go ahead and get rid of this stuff. And we should be looking good. Alright, so here, this message move, we're just going to be reading data from the server and then putting our other clients' positions towards just transferring that data over. So all we need to do is, in the first part, what we did is we took the server and we read whatever was coming into us, and then we spit out and wrote to all the other clients what's going on. So the first thing we need to do is read what we're gonna what the server sent to us. So what we did in the server, if we go to handle message, first thing we set the message ID and we set the X and Y. All right. So we wrote down, right here, we wrote down the message move, we wrote down the client, and then we wrote down the X and Y. So one thing about servers and buffers is you need to read them in the same order that you wrote to them. So think of it like a file. So basically what a socket is it's just, think of it as a file that we're reading and writing to. And that's just cross platforms through different computers and connections. So the first thing we're going to need to do, since we wrote down our client ID, is we're going to need to know what client to move. So I'm going to say client equals buffer read, and here I'm going to use our buffer and buffer u16, and then we're going to do our X variable, which is what we set in X, buffer underscore u16, and our Y equals buffer read buffer u16. So we're reading everything in here, and now what we need to do is check if we check the client map and see which client we need to move. So I think this will make a little bit more sense if we go ahead and I'm going to create my object now, and it's going to be called O other client. Oh, I butchered that. And this object right here is going to be what we actually see on our screen. So I'm going to go ahead and create the player again real quick. So this is going to be the player that we actually are moving, and then our other client is going to be what we're seeing on our screen. So if I just say sPlayer, we'll create a quick sprite, just make it a box. We'll make it blue. And I'm going to create one more sprite, and I'm going to call it sClient. and I'm going to make it green. Alright, so for our player, I'm going to hook up the sprite with our player, and the other client, I'm going to hook up with green. So we go ahead and create a room real quick, just to kind of demonstrate what's going on here. Create the background in black. So here's our player in the game, and you know, he's kind of running around, whatever. But when another client connects, it's actually going to create this object itself. And this is going to be a local object, but all of this object does is take in data from the server and we move it accordingly. So this, you'll see this box moving around, and that will actually be, for instance, if this guy was on the other screen moving around, and it would transfer over. And vice versa on the other screen as well. Alright, so the first thing we need to do in our message move is check if we've received a message from this user before. And if we haven't, then we're going to create an instance of that client. But if we have, then we just want to change the X positions of it. So I'm going to say if ds underscore map underscore exists. And here I'm going to say my client map ID and the key. And we got to make it into a string because this takes in a string of our client that we just read from. Oh, why are we getting an error there? Oh, there we go. So if we've read it, then we're going to create a new variable, client object, and this is going to equal to client map string client. So this is going to get the client that we just read from here, because again, in our server, we're writing right here, we're writing down our client ID current, which is what we get right here, which is just taking the client map and saying this is the instance of the object that's moving. Alright, so then all we have to do is say client object.x equals xx and client object.y equals yy. That's it. Then we're going to say else, and this is going to be if we have not received a message. So I'm just going to comment right here, if we've received a message from this client before. So if we haven't, then we're going to say var l equals instance create at our xx and yy that we just read, o other client. And then we're going to say client map string client equals L. So we're going to link that to the map. Make sure we don't have any errors there. Pretty simple. Now all we have to do is send that data to the server client, which is going to send it back to us. So we're going to say with o server client. And we don't want to send it to ourselves, obviously. So we're going to say if client underscore ID does not equal client underscore ID underscore current. Then we're going to say network send raw, and we're going to say our socket underscore ID, our send buffer that we're sending it to, and we're going to say buffer tell send buffer. And this buffer tell, we could just write in how many bytes we actually are reading from or writing to, which would be looks like 6. But if we use buffer tell, then it will just get the size of what we're sending and send it automatically. So if we go over to a server create, and as you can see where we put 7 here, we can actually just say buffer tell and our send buffer. Alright. And we're using our O server client, which means it already has these socket IDs and send buffers in it. And to actually, to actually get it from the O server client, we're going to have to just say self.socket ID, and we're going to want to use our send buffer from our client, so we're going to have to say other.send buffer and other.send buffer. If you don't do this, then it's going to get an error because it's looking for a send buffer on its own side because we're using the with. So actually on our server as well, we're going to want to do the same thing. So self and other. And make sure you do this, because if you do not do this, it will not work. All right. And right there, that's pretty much it for the handle message. So again, pretty simple stuff. We're just looking to see if we've received a message from this client. If we have not, then we're going to create an instance of it. And if we have, then we're just going to set the X and Y of that client object to its according X and Y that we read from. So now if we go into the O client, you see we have our handle message and all is good. So now we need to actually update it and see how fast we are sending this data back and forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another script, and this is going to be called client send movement. So I'll just write it down here, client send movement. All right. And here's where we're actually going to write out the data that we need. So in our handle message, you can see that we're only reading it. We're not actually writing anything from our client. So in our client send movement, we're going to say buffer seek, because again, from the last tutorial, we always need to start out at the beginning of our buffer. Our base is going to be buffer seek start, and our offset's going to be 0. And then here we're just going to write out everything we need. So what message we're sending and the X and Y coordinates that we need. So I'm going to say buffer write and our send buffer. And this is going to be a buffer U8. And our value is going to be message underscore move, which is actually 1. So you could put 1 in there, it would be the same thing. That's just a constant that we created in our first tutorial. I'm going to say buffer write send buffer. Buffer U16, and here I'm going to put in, and we have to round it because we're only sending integers. We can't actually send a float through a buffer. So I'm going to say oPlayer.x because we want to send our position. Copy this, paste it down for oPlayer.y. And then we just need to send it. So network send raw. We're going to use our socket. We're going to use send buffer. And we're just going to use buffer tell, which is our send buffer. All right, so that's really all we need. I'm going to go ahead and create another constant here. So I'm going to insert it, and I'm going to say update speed, and I'm going to set it to 3. And this update speed is how many steps our code gets transferred. So in our client, in the create event, I'm going to say alarm 0 equals update speed, if I can type it. And then I'm going to create an alarm 0, and I'm going to say client send movement, or what is it? Movement send. What the heck was it? Oh, I spelled it wrong. There we go. And then I'm just going to say alarm 0 equals update underscore speed. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and in the player, I'm just going to create a simple movement system. So if keyboard check ord D, x plus equals 5, we'll say. Copy this. AWS minus equals, this is Y, that is minus equals. So very simple. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to create some buttons that are going to say if you want to create a server or do you want to join as a client. So I'm just going to create a new sprite real quick as button. Now this has nothing to do really with the any sort of networking code, so if you want to skip over this you can, but I'm just going to show you how I'm going to do it. So we'll say 192 by 64 I'm just going to create like a little button outline. Whoops. There we go. Center it. And I'm going to create an O button. And in the draw event, draw self. And let's, in the create event, create a quick variable called text. Equal to nothing. And in the draw event, we'll say if text equals create server, then we'll just say draw set color C white, draw set H align, FA center, and draw set V align, FA center, and we'll draw the text at XY, and we'll just say just name the text there. Actually, you know, yeah, we don't even have to do that. We could just do that. Cool. And then in the mouse left pressed, here's where we say if text equals create server, and then we'll do else. So this is going to be if you click it and the text says create server, then we're going to say with O button, instance destroy, and instance create 0, 0, O server. And then if not, then we're going to say with O button, instance destroy, and instance create O client, and instance create our player at 100, 100, we'll say O player. And let's go ahead and put those guys in the room. Try and center it, make it look as good as we can. So here we'll go to the creation code. I'll say txt equals create server. And here we'll say join server. Alright, so that should be it. Now what we're going to have to do is actually compile the game, because in GameMaker we can only run one instance of it. So let's go ahead and just go to my documents, and I'll create a new folder called online builds. And then we will create single runtime execution on our online builds, and we'll compile it. So here I'm going to start it up. Here you can see it says create server, join server, so let's create the server. We're going to get just our firewall. We're going to allow access. Alright, now we're going to open up another one. And we're going to say join server. So here we have our box moving around. Let's join another one. Let join server. And if we move around, as you can see on our other screen, it's working perfectly. Here, if we kind of spread these out as much as we can. So as you can see, our blue box is the one that we're controlling, and on here, the green box is the actual other client that is sending the data. So I hope this kind of makes more sense to you on why we're using the other client. And as you can see too, you see how choppy this looks? The next episode, we're going to go ahead and make some motion interpolation so that it doesn't look choppy. So it looks very smooth, and you're not getting this. And we're not even going to be sending more messages. We're just going to basically lerp the positions from where we're predicting where it's going. All right. Well, we're not actually predicting, but we're just sort of smoothing it out instead of it being so rigorous and choppy. All right, so now if you guys have completed the code and watched it, you should have this. If not, go back and look at both tutorials, because even just a simple variable grammatical error could cost you the entire project. So go leave a like, go and subscribe. Let's go and try for 200 likes this time. Thank you guys for the support, and I will see you guys next episode. Visit CodyMadeSimple.com to learn more. Peace.